If you have the habit of mind reading, you need to make up especially strong rebuttals that will shock you back to reality. The most important rule is the one about being specific and accurate. Concentrating on the known facts is the best way to stop assuming that others are thinking ill of you. Here are some general rebuttals that are effective against mind reading. E. Stop it. Nonsense. E. Have no way of knowing what they're thinking. E. The only way to know others' opinions is to ask them. Straight. E. Assume nothing. E. Check it out. E. What else could that mean? Why assume the negative? E. What are the facts? Spell them out. E. Intuition is just an excuse for guessing. Josh was a librarian who dreaded having to work the front desk. He felt that the patrons were irritated at him if he couldn't answer questions, had to charge them fines, or had to make them wait during busy times. Words would pop into his head: slow, stupid, mean, arrogant, and so on. He would feel very anxious and flustered. When he examined the words that popped into his head, he found they stemmed from mind reading. He was then able to slow them down and elaborate them. This is the stream of negative self-talk that he wrote out in full. E. She thinks I'm slow. E. She hates me. E. He thinks I'm stupid not to know that author. E. He's being nice, but it's just patronizing. He's really seething inside because I was mean enough to charge the full fine. 82. Cognitive distortions. She thinks I'm an arrogant civil servant because I made her wait while those little kids checked out their books. She'd like to report me to the head librarian. Josh's rebuttal took the form of repeated shouts inside his head, and careful observation of the observable facts. Here is his full written rebuttal. Stop it. This is just somebody's grandmother trying to get through the line in a hurry. I don't know what she thinks, and I don't care. Stop it. This is just some guy who doesn't know who wrote the book he wants. That's all I know about him. Stop it. This is just some poor slob who forgot to get his books back on time. He's being nice about paying the fine. Who knows how he really feels? Stop it. This is just some girl in a pink sweater who had to wait till the kids were through. She doesn't know me from Adam, and I don't know what she's thinking. If it's important to know what these people are thinking about me, I could ask them. But it's a waste of time trying to invent their opinions for them. When he was actually at work, Josh couldn't run such long monologues through his head. When the negative word, stupid, flashed into his mind, he would just mentally shout back, stop it. He's just a guy who needs info. That's all. 8. Control fallacies. If your pathological critic uses the fallacy of under control, your rebuttal must emphasize your real and actual control over your life. The most crucial rule is the one about being specific. Tell yourself exactly what you can do to regain control of a given situation. Here are some general rebuttals to get you started. Wait. I'm doing it again. No more victim crap. I got myself into this mess and I can get myself out. Let's see, what can I do? This helpless feeling is just the critic. I refuse to let my critic take away my power. 83. Self-esteem. This situation is the result of a long series of actions or inactions on my part. It can be changed by direct action. Randy was a new father who felt overwhelmed. He had upset his habitual routine, he was short on sleep, and his pathological critic was taking the opportunity to whittle away at his self-esteem. Here's what Randy's critic was saying. You're exhausted. You're not coping. You'll never get organized. You're helpless. You're just barely treading water. There's nothing you can do. There's always another chore for you to do. It will be like this for at least the next 2 years. Randy knew he would need a strong rebuttal to arrest this constant stream of defeatism, instead of no, or some other mental interrupter. He imagined a bomb going off inside his head. When the smoke cleared, he imagined a wise, compassionate mentor who would calmly rebut his pathological critic. His mentor, he realized, looked a lot like the alien Yoda from Star Wars. This is what Randy wrote down for his mentor to say. Boom. Randy, relax and take a deep breath. Stop thinking about all the things you feel you have to do. Find that calm place inside yourself. Breathe deeply and enjoy a moment peace. Asterisk. You are in control, not the baby. 2. You must respond to your child, but you have choices as to how. You will get better and better at this. Muster your resources and take charge. Asterisk. Options. Setting up alternating shifts with your wife, babysitters, letting the grandparents help, new parents groups, hiring someone to do house and yard work. You can cope. You can get enough rest and enjoy your baby. Of overcontrol, where you take responsibility for the pain and unhappiness of those around you, is functionally similar to 84. Cognitive distortions. Self-blame. Suggested rebuttals in the self-blame section to cope with overcontrol. 9. Emotional reasoning. To fight the distortion of emotional reasoning, you need to follow the rules about being non-judgmental and specific. Create rebuttals that omit emotionally loaded words like love, hate, disgusting, furious, depressed, and so on. Constantly encore. Teach yourself to look for the thoughts that underlie and create the painful emotions you feel. Those underlying thoughts are where the pathological critic does his work. Those thoughts are what you need to ultimately refute. Sent here are some rebuttals for calming emotional turmoil and countering the underlying distorted thoughts. E. Lies. My emotions are lying to me. E. Distrust all sudden feelings. Registered, there is nothing automatically true about my feelings. Look for the underlying thoughts. What am I telling myself that makes me feel so sad, so anxious, so angry? Correct the thoughts and the pain will go away. Marjorie was a baker at a gourmet bakery. The other people in the bakery never knew whether Marjorie would be on cloud 9 or down in the dumps. She was ruled by her feelings. She would see a line about an airplane crash, think about death, feel a wave of sadness, and emotionally reason that her life wasn't worth much, since it could be snuffed out in a moment. Someone would ask her a perfectly innocent question about her muffins in the oven, and she would tell herself that some criticism was implied, feel threatened and anxious, and emotionally conclude that her job was in danger. She would tell herself that her credit cards would never be paid off, feel depressed, and emotionally decide that she was a failure, that she would always be poor and miserable. Marjorie's problem was exacerbated by the fact that she was not very aware of the chain reaction from experience to thoughts to emotions to emotional reasoning. She just felt lousy and figured she would always feel lousy. When she started writing down her self-talk, she had a hard time getting back to the thoughts. This is all she came up with at first. Feel sad, hopeless. Life is so fragile. Registered, I'm afraid of losing my job. I don't know why, I just feel on edge whenever someone looks over my shoulder. 85. Self-esteem. Must be a failure. I feel overwhelmed by my debts. To go further, Marjorie had to literally invent her thoughts. She would make up a thought that sounded like it might account for her feelings. Once she did this, she found that she could say, yes, that's it, or, no, it's more like this. Quote. Eventually she completed this list. I'm going to die. It's horrible. Can't stand it. They'll throw me out on the street with no references. I'll starve. I'll lose my apartment, my bike, everything. I'll be bankrupt and on welfare. All my friends will hate me. The catastrophic messages from her pathological critic that triggered Marjorie's depression. She began creating her rebuttal by crossing out the emotionally loaded words: die, horrible, throw me out, lose, bankrupt, hate. Then Marjorie made up a strong beginning for her rebuttal to shock her out of her emotional funk. Finally, she created reminders to be specific in a balanced list of her rational resources to counter the critic's catastrophic predictions. Here's her full rebuttal. Stop. Just stop this right now, Marjorie. This garbage is 99% feelings. Asterisk. There's nothing automatically true about feelings. My feelings change when my thinking changes. How did I get into this? What was I thinking about? That's ridiculous. That's my critic. I have more on the ball than I give myself credit for. I'm in good health. I can take care of myself. I'm a good baker. They depend on me around here. Registered, I'm still young and smart enough to straighten out my finances. Marjorie used the starred rebuttal points whenever she felt overwhelmed. Depending on the thoughts that started the whole episode, she would improvise the rest of her rebuttal. Sometimes she couldn't pinpoint the thoughts that started her down the familiar path of emotional reasoning. She would then have to get out the pencil and paper again and use the 3-column techniques. 86. Cognitive distortions. Sometimes Marjorie didn't need to know the original negative thoughts. She found that she could say to herself, these are feelings, not facts. They will pass in a little while. Wait it out. And in a few hours the emotional storm usually began to abate and she felt more confidence in herself again. 87.6. Compassion. The essence of self-esteem is compassion for yourself. When you have compassion for yourself, you understand and accept yourself. If you make a mistake, you forgive yourself. You have reasonable expectations of yourself. You set attainable goals. You tend to see yourself as basically good. Your pathological critic cannot stand compassion. To him, compassion is like water to the Wicked Witch of Oz or garlic to a vampire. When your self-talk is compassionate, your pathological critic is gagged. Compassion is one of the most potent weapons you have for keeping your pathological critic at bay. When you begin to feel compassion for yourself, you begin exposing your sense of worth. You literally uncover the hidden jewel of your own value. Compassionate self-talk can wash away the sediment of hurt and rejection that may have covered your innate self-acceptance for years. This chapter will define compassion, show how compassion for yourself and compassion for others are related, discuss how to achieve a sense of self-worth, and present exercises designed to increase your compassionate skills. Compassion defined. Most people think of compassion as an admirable character trait like honesty, loyalty, or spontaneity. If you have compassion, you show it by being kind, sympathetic, and helpful to others. This is certainly true. However, as it relates to self-esteem, passion is much more. First of all, it is not an unchanging character. Self-esteem. Trait. Compassion is actually a skill you can acquire if you lack it or improve if you already have it. Second, compassion is not something you feel only for others. It should also inspire you to be kind, sympathetic, and helpful to yourself. There are 3 basic components to the skill of compassion: understanding, accepting, and forgiving. Understanding. An attempt to understand is the first step toward a compassionate relationship to yourself and others. Understanding something important about yourself or a loved one can totally change your feelings and attitudes. Consider the case of Sean, a brick mason who finally realized why he overate in the evenings. One day he had a particularly hard job. After working until dark, he realized that he still had a full day's work left for the next day, when he was supposed to start yet another job. He drove home with one eye on the temperature gauge because his car had been overheating and he couldn't afford to get it fixed. He felt exhausted, anxious, and defeated. He thought about stopping at the liquor store and getting some nuts, some corn chips, and some dip to snack on before dinner. As he pictured himself ensconced in front of the TV with his snacks piled on the arms of the chair, he began to feel better. But the critic had also started kicking him for his junk food binges. At this point Sean did something different. He asked himself why the thought of food made him feel better. Then he had an insight. He overate in the evenings to escape his feelings of pressure and inadequacy during the day. While snacking, he felt comforted and safe. This sudden understanding was Sean's first step toward a more compassionate view of himself. He understood his overeating as a response to unbearable pressures, rather than an expression of gluttony or weakness. Not all understanding comes so easy. Sometimes it comes as the result of a plodding, sustained effort to figure things out. Your decision to buy and read this book is an example of a conscious, step-by-step approach to understanding. Understanding the nature of your problems doesn't mean that you have to come up with solutions to them. It merely means that you have figured out how you operate, what you are likely to do in a given situation and why you probably do it. It means you have some sense of how you came to be the person you are. Understanding others is mostly a matter of listening to them instead of listening to your own self-talk about them. Instead of 90. Compassion. Saying to yourself, what a blabbermouth. Will she ever shut up? You listen as your mother tells you about her trip to the doctor. You ask her questions about her symptoms and the tests she had to take. You gently probe for the feelings underneath the facts. Gradually you realize that she is not just complaining about the nurse and the receptionist. She is worried about getting older, about death. You are able to empathize and offer some sympathy, instead of your usual impatience. This makes her feel better and you feel better about yourself. Acceptance. Acceptance is perhaps the most difficult aspect of compassion. Acceptance is an acknowledgement of the facts, with all value judgments suspended. You neither approve nor disapprove, you accept. For example, the statement, I accept the fact that I'm out of shape, does not mean, I'm out of shape and that's perfectly okay with me. It means, I'm out of shape and I know it. I may not like it. In fact, sometimes I may feel like a barrel of flab. But right now putting my feelings aside, editing out value judgments, and just facing the bare facts. Marty is a good example of the power of acceptance. He was an auto body worker who constantly put himself down for being a short, fat, ugly little man. After his struggle to gain self-compassion, he composed a brief description of himself to use every time his pathological critic started whispering, short, fat, ugly. He would counter by saying, I'm 5'6", and I accept that. I'm 182 pounds, and I accept that. I'm getting bald, and I accept that, too. These are all facts. These facts are to be accepted, not used to beat myself up. Acceptance of others involves acknowledging the facts about them without your usual judgments. For example, Lori usually thought of a particular teacher as a cold fish, totally without feelings. He never gives a word of encouragement or extra time for assignments. However, she made a great effort to accept this man because she had to work with him on an important student-faculty committee. First, Lori got rid of the derogatory labels in her mind. Then she mentally ran down the facts. Dr. Summers is quiet, reserved, and detached. He usually gives help only when formally asked. He takes deadlines very seriously. I may not like his style as a teacher, but I accept him for what he is. I can work with him and still accomplish something. This exercise in understanding helped Lori get some important joint resolutions passed by her committee. The whole experience boosted her self-esteem as well, because she 91. Self-esteem. Felt that she had learned the value of being a little more detached and reserved herself. Forgiveness. Forgiveness flows out of understanding and acceptance. Like those two traits, it doesn't mean approval. It means letting go of the past, reaffirming self-respect in the present, and looking toward a better future. When you forgive yourself for screaming at your child, you don't change wrong to right or forget all about it. Your tantrum was still the wrong thing to have done, and you will remember your mistake so that you can do better in the future. But do right, case closed, and proceed with today's business without dwelling on the incident and feeling rotten all over again. Alice was a young woman who had trouble accepting dates. Men would ask her out to dinner or the movies, and she would invent some excuse for why she couldn't go. Then her pathological critic would start up, chicken. He's a nice guy, why can't you take a chance? You've blown it forever with him. Alice would suffer this attack repeatedly for days. When she began fighting back, forgiveness was one of her most powerful weapons. She would say to herself, okay, I made a mistake. I would have liked to go out with John, but I felt too shy and scared. That's in the past. There's nothing to do about it now. I forgive myself, and I can go on to the next opportunity. I refuse to atone forever for my shyness. True forgiveness of others means that the accounts are balanced. The person who harmed you no longer owes you anything. He or she is no longer in a one-down position to you regarding what happened. You have given up any idea of retaliation, reparation, restitution, or revenge. You face the future with a clean slate between you. Charlie was a landscape architect whose relationship with his dad was poisoned by a long-standing disagreement over some money they had earned when they were in the gardening business together. His self-esteem suffered whenever he compared himself to friends who had closer relationships with their fathers. Finally, he realized that the key to raising his own opinion of himself and getting back in touch with his dad was to sincerely forgive him. I had to stop rehashing all the old arguments, Charlie explained. They were hanging around both our necks and keeping us apart. When he forgave his dad and put the past behind him, Charlie's self-esteem and his relationship with his father improved. 92. Compassion. Toward a compassionate mind. Understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness, these are three big words that seem almost platitudinous. No one becomes more understanding or forgiving because he or she reads somewhere that this is a good way to be. Abstract concepts, no matter how laudable, have little effect on behavior. To develop a compassionate mind, you must make a commitment to a different way of thinking. The old way was to judge and then reject. The new way requires that you suspend judgment for a few moments. When confronted with a situation that you traditionally evaluate in a negative way, she's stupid. I screwed up again. He's selfish. I'm incompetent. You can instead use a specific series of thoughts that are the compassionate response. The compassionate response. The compassionate response begins with three questions you should always ask yourself to promote an understanding of the problematic behavior. 1. What need was he, she, I trying to meet with that behavior? 2. What beliefs or awarenesses influence the behavior? 3. What pain, hurt, or other feelings influence the behavior? Next come three statements to remind yourself that you can accept a person without blame or judgment, no matter how unfortunate his or her choices have been. 4. I wish hadn't happened, but it was merely an attempt to meet his, her, my needs. 5. Him, her, myself without judgment or feeling of wrongness for that attempt. 6. No matter how unfortunate his, her, my decision, I accept. The person who did it is someone who is, like all of us, trying to survive. Finally, two statements suggest that the slate can be wiped clean, that it is time to forgive and let go of it. 7. It's over, I can let go of it. 8. Nothing is owed for this mistake. Try to memorize this sequence. Make a commitment to use it whenever you notice that you are judging yourself or others. Revise it, if you wish, so that the language and suggestions feel right for 93. Self-esteem. You. But be sure to the basic thrust of the compassionate response, understanding, acceptance, forgiveness. The problem of worth. Learning compassionate skills helps you to contact your own sense of self-worth. But that sense can be very elusive if you suffer from low self-esteem. At times it seems like you're just not worth anything. It may seem that nobody is worth much. What makes people worthwhile? Where do you look for evidence of worth? What are the criteria? Many criteria for human worth have been devised throughout history. The ancient Greeks valued personal virtue in a human and political sense. If you conformed to ideals of harmony and moderation and contributed to society's order, you were considered worthy and might enjoy high self-esteem. Worthy Romans were expected to display patriotism and valor. Early Christians valued love of God and mankind over allegiance to worldly kingdoms. Worthy Buddhists strive to rid themselves of all desire. Worthy Hindus contemplate ways to deepen their reverence for all living beings. Worthy Muslims respect law, tradition, and honor. Liberals value love of man and good works. Conservatives value industry and respect for tradition. The worthy merchants are the rich ones. The worthy artists are the talented ones. The worthy politicians are the powerful ones. The worthy actors are the popular ones. And so on. In our culture, the most common solution to the problem is to equate worth with work. You are what you do, and other positions and professions are more or less worthy than your own. Better than psychologists or better than lawyers or better than accountants or better than stockbrokers or better than disc jockeys or better than hardware clerks and so on. Within a given profession or social level, our culture next awards worth based on accomplishments. Getting a raise, a degree, a promotion, or winning in competition are worth a lot. Acquiring the right house, car, furnishings, boat, or college education for your kids, all these accomplishments are worth a lot too. If you get fired or laid off, lose your home, or in any other way slip down the accomplishment ladder, you are in deep trouble. You lose all your counters and become socially worthless. Buying into these cultural concepts of worth can be deadly. 4. Example, John was a bank examiner who equated his worth with his accomplishments at work, when he was late in meeting an important 94. Compassion. Deadline, he felt worthless. When he felt worthless, he got depressed. When he got depressed, he worked slower and missed more deadlines. More worthless, got more depressed, worked less diligently, and so on in a deadly downward spiral. John wasn't worthless, he was crippled by an irrational concept of worth. And because his irrational concept was a very common one in our society, he had no one close to him to point out the dilemma. John's supervisor agreed that he was worthless to the company if he couldn't meet deadlines. His wife and brother agreed that something was wrong with him. His therapist tended to agree that poor performance at work was certainly something to get depressed about. In subtle ways, they all reinforced John's belief that he was worthless. He was on a self-propelled merry-go-round of depression, and they weren't helping pull him off. They were helping push. When in this sort of cultural jam, it may help a little to remind yourself that every criterion ever devised for measuring human worth is dependent on its cultural context. The Zen monk of great virtue is worthless in Wall Street. Street. The highly respected stockbroker is worthless in the jungles of Borneo. The most powerful witch doctor is worthless in the halls of the Pentagon. John tried reminding himself of this. What does it matter if the first intercity audit is finished this week or next? Are stars going to fall from the sky? Is my total worth as a human being really so dependent on whether two columns of numbers balance? I wouldn't even have this problem on the beach at Pago Pago or in Shakespeare's London. This self-talk gave John some distance on the situation, but it didn't boost his self-esteem much. The fact was, he had chosen to operate and compete in the arena of bank examination, not beachcombing in Pago Pago or Renaissance playwriting. He was a member of a Western, urban culture, and he felt that he had to measure up to the prevailing standards of success, even if those standards were irrational or subjective. A fruitful place to turn is to your own experience and observations. Most obvious and reasonable cultural criteria for worth can often be confounded by observation. For example, if pediatricians are more worthy than the people who wash their windows, then it follows that pediatricians should have a higher sense of self-worth. All the pediatricians should be basking in the warm glow of their high self-esteem, while the window washers should all be diving off their scaffolds in despair. But it just isn't so. Statistics show that your profession is only slightly related to your level of self-esteem or mental health. The observable fact is that there are both pediatricians and window washers who like themselves, and 95. Self-esteem. There are similar ratios of pediatricians and window washers who don't like themselves. John's personal observations bore this out. He knew other people in financial occupations who had good self-esteem, but weren't really any more competent or successful than himself. On the negative side, one of John's classmates in college was a vice president of a major corporation, but John knew him to be haunted by a sense of worthlessness despite his accomplishments. Obviously, some people have solved this problem of personal worth and some haven't. You want to enjoy high self-esteem, you too will have to come to terms with the concept of human worth. When you conclude the solution must lie outside of culturally determined criteria, that leaves 4 ways you can approach the concept of worth and come out with your self-esteem intact. Affirming your worth. The first way to deal with the problem of worth is to throw it out the window. That human worth is an abstract concept that, upon examination, turns out to have an extremely fragile basis in reality. It's just another global label. All the criteria turn out to be subjective, culturally variable, and damaging to your self-esteem. The idea of identifying a universal standard of worth is a tempting illusion, but you and everybody else are better off without it. True human worth is impossible to determine. The same way to deal with the problem of worth is to realize that worth exists, but that it is equally distributed and immutable. Everyone at birth has one unit of human worth, absolutely equal to everyone else's unit of worth. No matter what happens in your life, no matter what you do or is done to you, your human worth can't be diminished or increased. Nobody is worth more or less than anybody else. It's interesting to note that these two options are functionally the same. Both free you to live without having to compare yourself to others and make constant value judgments about your relative worth. Of course, these first two options are essentially different. The first kind of practical agnosticism. One person may or may not be worth more than another, but this judgment is a hopelessly difficult and dangerous one to make, and you refuse to make it. The second option is in line with traditional Western religious teaching, and results in a comforting, non-denominational feeling that people are worth something, that they are special, that they are more. 96. Compassion. Akin to angels than to animals. For the purpose of fostering self-esteem, you can choose either option and succeed. The third choice is different from the first two options without negating either of them. In this option you acknowledge your own internal experience of human worth. Recall a time when you felt good about yourself, when human worth seemed real and you had a good piece of it. Recall the feeling that you were okay, with all your faults and failings, in spite of others' opinions. You may have had only a glimpse of this emotion in your life. You may be, at this moment, totally out of touch with the feeling of personal worth. You may have only a dim, colorless, purely intellectual memory that once upon a time you felt good about yourself. The point is to admit that your personal worth exists, as evidenced by your own internal experience, however brief and occasional it has been. Your worth is like the sun, always shining, even when you are in the shade and can't feel it. You can only keep yourself in the shade by letting your pathological critic throw up clouds of confusion or by crawling under the rock of depression. John, the bank examiner, was able to contact his inner sense of worth by remembering a neighbor he had when he was 12. She was an old woman named Ackerson who lived next door. She'd often look at John's school projects and drawings when his mother and father didn't have time or were not forthcoming with praise. Mrs. Ackerson always had great enthusiasm for his creations, telling him what a clever boy he was and how he would go far. John remembered the pride he felt, and his sense of confidence about the future. Sometimes it was possible for John to reach back to the memory of Mrs. Ackerson and tap into his early feelings of pride and competence. The way to deal with the problem of worth is to take a good look at yourself through the lens of compassion. Compassion exposes the essence of your humanness. What do you understand about yourself? First, you live in a world in which you must constantly struggle to meet basic needs, or you will die. You must find food, shelter, emotional support, rest, and recreation. Almost all of your energy goes into these major need areas. You do the best you can, given your resources. But the available tools you have for meeting your needs are limited by what you know and don't know, your conditioning, your emotional makeup, the degree of support you receive from others, your health, your sensitivity to pain and pleasure, and so on. And all through this struggle to survive you are aware that both your intellectual and 97. Self-esteem. Physical abilities will inevitably deteriorate, and despite all your efforts you will die. In the course of your struggle you make many mistakes and are rewarded with pain. Often you feel afraid, both of very real dangers and the vaguer dreads that come from a life without guarantees, where loss and hurt can slap you down at any time. There are so many kinds of pain, and yet you carry on, seeking whatever emotional and physical sustenance is available. The last point is key, you carry on. In the face of all the pain, past and to come, you continue to struggle. You plan, you cope, you decide. You continue to live and to feel. If you let awareness soak in, if you let yourself really feel the struggle, you may begin to get a glimmer of your real worth. It is the force, the life energy that keeps you trying. The degree of success is irrelevant. How you look, how psychologically or physically nourished you are, is irrelevant. The only thing that counts is the effort. And the source of your worth is the effort. After understanding comes acceptance. Nothing one does in the quest to survive is bad. Each approach is only more or less effective, painful or not painful. Despite your mistakes, you are doing a good job, because it is the best job you can do. Your mistakes and the pain that follows teach you. It is possible to accept everything you do without judgment because every minute of your life you are engaged in the inescapable struggle. You can forgive and let go of your failures and mistakes because you have already paid for them. It is our condition that we do not always know the best way, and even knowing the way, we may not have the resources to follow it. Your worth, then, is that you were born into this place, and that you continue to live here despite the enormous difficulty of the struggle. Compassion for others. To be complete, compassion must be directed toward others as well as toward yourself. At present you may find it easier to understand, accept, and forgive others than to understand, accept, and forgive yourself. Or you may find that it's relatively easy to feel compassion for yourself, but that you're constantly irritated at the failings of others. Either kind of imbalance can lower your self-esteem. Fortunately, this imbalance is self-correcting. Feeling increased compassion for others will eventually make it easier to feel compassion for yourself. Learning to give yourself a break will lead naturally. 98. Compassion. To a more compassionate view of others. In other words, the golden rule operates in both forward and reverse. Love thy neighbor as thyself, or, love thyself as thy neighbor. If loving yourself seems like misplaced affection, then start with increasing your compassion for others. After you have learned to understand, accept, and forgive the foibles of others, your own shortcomings won't seem so enormous. Empathy. A more convenient term than compassion for others is empathy. Empathy is clearly understanding the thoughts and feelings of another person. Empathy involves listening carefully, asking questions, setting aside your value judgments, and using your imagination to understand another's point of view, opinions, feelings, motivations, and situation. The insight gained by the exercise of empathy leads naturally to the compassionate process of understanding, accepting, and forgiving. Empathy is not feeling the same way somebody else feels. That's sympathy, a related but different activity that is not always possible or appropriate. Empathy is also not acting in a tender, understanding manner. That's support, another activity that's not always possible or appropriate. Empathy is not agreement or approval either. Empathy operates outside of and prior to sympathy. Support, agreement, and approval. True empathy is the ultimate antidote to anger and resentment. Remember, anger is caused by your thoughts, not others' actions. When you take the time to thoroughly understand another's thoughts and motivations, your mind reading and blaming are short-circuited. You see the logic behind others' actions. You may still not agree with the logic or like the actions, but you understand. You come to see that real evil and meanness are very rare, that the vast majority of people are seeking pleasure or avoiding pain in what seems to them to be the best way at the time. You see how little your own worth or actions enter into the equation. You are free to accept the facts of the matter, forgive the offender, and move on. June was a social worker who frequently had run-ins with her supervisor. June felt that the clients had to come first and paperwork second, and so she was often late with her weekly and monthly statistics and reports. She felt critical about her supervisor's insistence that she keep up with the paperwork, feeling that he didn't really care for her clients as much as he cared about looking good on paper. 99. Self-esteem. The state of affairs improved after June had a long conversation with her supervisor at a staff picnic. She consciously made an effort to listen and understand the supervisor's point of view. As they talked, she refrained from making her usual accusatory or sarcastic remarks. Her supervisor gradually unbent, letting some of his commitment and feelings show. A story of how he had once lost a lot of grant money and killed a valuable outreach program because he messed up the paperwork. This major failure had taught him that looking good on paper was a necessary precondition for doing good. As a social worker, after this conversation, June was much more kindly disposed toward her supervisor. Her exercise in empathy paid off in a better working relationship. Exercises. This chapter concludes with 4 exercises. The first 2 will train you in feeling compassion for others, and the last 2 combine compassion for others with compassion for yourself. Go with your strength, try the exercise that seems easiest first. Then proceed to the more challenging exercises. Video encounter. This is a perfectly safe, non-threatening way to practice empathy for others. Watch a TV show you hate, one you normally wouldn't be caught dead watching. If you normally watch game shows, pick a serious drama. If you normally watch only news, tune in some cartoons. If you prefer comedies, watch a TV preacher, or a cop show, or a soap opera. Watch and listen. Every time you feel irritated, disgusted, bored, or embarrassed, set your feelings aside and refocus your attention. Say to yourself, I notice I'm feeling very irritated by this. That's okay, but it's not what I'm interested in right now. I can set the irritation aside and just observe for a while, without judging. Suspend your value judgments for a time and imagine why the faithful fans watch this show. What did they get out of it? Did they watch for excitement, enlightenment, diversion, escape, identification with the characters, confirmation of their prejudices? Try to understand the attractive features of this show and what kind of person likes it. When you arrive at an empathetic understanding, switch to another kind of show and try again. Remember, you don't have to. 100. Compassion. Of what you see, just see it clearly and understand its attractions. The goal of this exercise isn't to expand or corrupt your viewing taste. This is to provide a safe, non-threatening situation in which you can practice setting aside your snap judgments and gain insight into a point of view you would ordinarily dismiss out of hand. Active listening. With a friend. Choose a friend who likes to try new things. Explain that you want to improve your listening skills. Ask your friend to tell you a story about something that is important in his or her life, a traumatic experience, an important childhood memory, or a hope for the future. As your friend talks, your job is to listen carefully and ask questions about any parts that you don't understand. Ask your friend to clarify or expand. Dig beneath the facts by asking for information on thoughts and feelings. Why was that important to you? How did you feel about that? What did you learn from that? From time to time, paraphrase what your friend has said. So in other words, you. Wait, let me see if I understand. You thought that. What I hear you saying is. Paraphrasing is an important part of listening with empathy because it keeps you on track. It helps you remove your own false interpretations and clarify your friend's precise meaning. Your friend gets the satisfaction of knowing that he or she has really been heard, and a chance to correct any errors you have made. You then incorporate the corrections in revised paraphrases. With acquaintances, now you can go on to a more difficult exercise. Choose people that you don't know as well and practice your empathetic skills without their knowledge of what you are doing. What they're talking to you about, ask for clarification and amplification. Resist your impulse to argue or jump in with an anecdote of your own. Notice when you start judging them in your mind and set the judgments aside. Remember that you don't have to love them, that you are just trying to understand something without your own self-talk getting in the way. Especially watch out for any comparisons with yourself that you find yourself making. With someone you don't know well, paraphrasing is even more important. It helps you remember an unfamiliar story, assures the speaker of your interest, and helps you separate your own mental. 101. Self-esteem. Processes from what was actually said. As your acquaintance clarifies and corrects, your understanding deepens and the conversation will often shift to a more personal, intimate level. True opinions, feelings, and areas of uncertainty or vulnerability will be gradually uncovered as the speaker learns that you are a careful, interested listener who can be trusted to hear a person out without jumping all over the conversation. Do this exercise often enough, and acquaintances become friends. With strangers. At a party or other gathering, pick someone you don't know or someone you don't like. Engage that person in conversation and use your listening skills to really try to comprehend what he or she has to say. Follow the instructions given for listening to friends and acquaintances, realizing that it will probably be more difficult to suspend judgment and concentrate on asking for information and paraphrasing. When you actually don't like or with whom you have nothing in common, it is important to remind yourself of the basis of compassion. Everyone is just trying to survive like you are. Ask yourself the 3 questions that begin the compassionate response. Ask yourself, what need is this person meeting by saying this? How is it making this person feel more secure, more in control, less anxious, less in pain? What beliefs are influencing him or her? Compassion for things past. Compassion for things past. This exercise that you can do over and over to develop skills of understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness. This moment, as you are reading, is the present. Every other event of your life is in the past. Some of you used to reject yourself. Not visiting your father more before he died, the demanding way you dealt with your first wife, things you said as you were separating, your eating binge last week, your failed effort to stop smoking, your argument with your son, and so on. But you don't have to go on hurting yourself with the past. These events can be re-experienced by using the compassionate response. Here's what you do. First, select an event from the past, one that the critic has used to make attacks. Now get into a comfortable position. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Scan your body for tension and stretch or relax any tight areas. At this point, let yourself begin drifting into the past. Go back to that time when your selected event was unfolding. See yourself doing whatever it was you now regret. See how you were dressed, see the room or the 102. Compassion. Environment, see whoever else is present. Hear any conversation that is taking place. Notice any feelings you are having in the past event, either emotional or physical. As best you can, let yourself relive the event. See the action unfolding, hear the words, notice your reactions. Now, while still holding on to the image of yourself in the middle of the event, ask yourself this question. What need was one trying to meet? Think about it. Were you trying to feel more secure, more in control, less anxious, less guilty? Take your time with the answer. Now ask. What was I thinking at the time? What were your beliefs about the situation? How were you interpreting things? What did you assume to be true? Don't rush your answer. Now ask. What kind of pain or feeling was influencing me? Take your time and think about the emotional context of the event. When you have some answers to these questions, when you know the needs, thoughts, and feelings that influenced you, it's time to accept and forgive yourself for who you were at that moment in time. Stay focused on the image of yourself in the middle of the event and say this to the person you were. I wish this hadn't happened, but I was trying to meet my needs. I accept myself without judgment or any feelings of wrongness for my attempt. I accept myself at that moment as trying to survive. Really try to feel each of these statements. Allow them to sink in. Now it is time to let go of the past. Say to yourself, I owe no debt for this mistake. It is over, I can forgive myself. If this exercise works at all for you, use it with as many past events as you can. As you keep using it, the compassionate response will become more automatic. Forgiveness will come easier, and you will feel less caught in the painful regrets of the past. Compassion meditation. This exercise has 3 parts: visualizing and feeling compassion for someone who has hurt you, for someone you have hurt, and 103. Self-esteem. For yourself. You can have someone read this to you, or make a tape recording and listen to it. Speak slowly, in a low, distinct, relaxed tone. For someone who has hurt you. Sit or lie on your back with your hands and arms uncrossed and your legs stretched out side by side. Close your eyes and take several deep breaths. Continue to breathe deeply and slowly as you scan your body for tension. As you notice tight areas, relax your muscles and settle into a heavy, warm, relaxed state. Let your breathing slow even further, and suspend your judgments. Accept whatever images come to you, even if they don't immediately make sense. Imagine that there is a chair in front of you. Someone is sitting in the chair, someone you know who has hurt you in some way. Imagine that person who has hurt you sitting silently in the chair. Notice all the details, how big or small the person is, the clothes, the colors, the posture. The person who has hurt you is looking calmly, expectantly at you. Say to the person, you are a human being like me. You are trying to survive. When you hurt me, you were trying to survive. You do your best, given your limitations and your understanding of the situation at the time. I can understand your motivations, your fears, your hopes. I share them because I am human too. I may not like what you did, but I can understand it. I accept the fact that you hurt me. I do not like it, but I do not make you bad for doing it. Nothing now can change what happened. I forgive you. I may not approve or agree, but I can forgive. I can let go of the past and wipe the slate clean. I know better than to expect atonement. I let go of revenge and resentment. Our differences are in the past. I am in control of the present and I can forgive you in the present. I can leave my anger behind. Continue looking at the person who hurt you. Gradually let the person enter your heart. Open yourself. Let anger and resentment fade out like music being turned down. Open further. If it's difficult to empathize or let go of your anger, don't judge yourself for how difficult it is. Take a moment more if you need to, and go at your own pace. When you are ready, say, I forgive you, one more time. Let the image of the person in the chair fade from sight. For someone you have hurt. Imagine the person in the chair is now someone whom you have hurt, someone from whom you want understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness. See all the 104. Compassion. Details of clothing and appearance. Make the vision as real as you can. The person you have hurt is looking at you calmly, expectantly. Say to the person, I am a human being, worthy but imperfect. I am like you. We are both just trying to survive. When I hurt you, I was just trying to do what seemed best for me at the time. If I had then the awareness I do now, I would have chosen differently. But at the time, I could only do what I did. I understand that I hurt you, and I want you to know that hurting you is not my goal. Please accept the fact that I hurt you and nothing can change that. I would undo it if I could. You would undo it if you could. But we can't. Nothing now can change the past. Please forgive me. I don't ask you to approve of what I did, or agree with me, but I do ask you to forgive me. I want to put our differences in the past, wipe the slate clean, and start fresh. Please open your heart to me. Understand, accept, and forgive. As you look at the person you hurt, see that person slowly smile. Know that you are understood, you are accepted, you are forgiven. Let the image of the person fade away until the chair is empty. For yourself. For the final part of this meditation, imagine yourself sitting in the chair. Again, see all the details. See yourself dressed as you were dressed, looking as you look now. Imagine that the image of yourself is saying, I am a human being. I am worthwhile just because I exist and try to survive. I take care of myself. I take myself seriously. I correctly take myself into consideration first in all matters. I have legitimate needs and wants. I can choose what I need and want without having to justify it to anybody. I make choices and I take responsibility for them. I always do my best. Each thought and action is the best I am capable of at the time. Because I'm human, I make mistakes. I accept my mistakes without blame or judgment. When I make a mistake, I learn from it. I am imperfect and I forgive myself for my mistakes. But others are equally worthy, equally imperfect. I have compassion for them because they are engaged in the same struggle for survival that I am. Imagine a figure of yourself in the chair getting up, coming over to where you are, and sitting or lying down in your body, merging into one whole person. Figure of yourself in the chair getting up, coming over to where you are, and sitting or lying down in your body, merging into one whole person. 105. Self-esteem. Relax and rest. You are at peace with yourself, at peace with others. When you are ready, open your eyes and get up slowly, feeling refreshed and relaxed, with a sense of compassionate acceptance toward yourself and others. Do this exercise at least 5 times over the next 2 weeks. 106. S. The shoulds. Number evening in 1952, a middle-aged black doorman was hailing a taxi for a white family that had just come down the steps from the Sheraton. Before anyone could stop her, their 6-year-old child darted into the street. She was chasing her windblown hat directly into the path of an oncoming tour bus. Suddenly, with the reflexes of a much younger man, the doorman launched into the street, tackled the child, and rolled with her to safety. What's interesting about this event is the very different reactions it elicited. The doorman's wife was furious. She told him he was risking his life on some fool stunt when he had a wife and children who needed him. It's just wrong, your family's always got to come first. A brother also disapproved, but mostly because the rescued child was white. If you're going to kill yourself, do it for one of our own. The hotel manager, on the other hand, declared the rescue a selfless act, and that year provided a rather substantial Christmas bonus. The doorman's pastor heard the story and described it as heroic in his Sunday sermon. Whoever saves a child, he said, saves the world. Because who knows which of our children will grow up to be the great healer, the great leader, or the saint. The same triggered these very different reactions because of the unique belief systems through which people filter the world. Reality hardly matters. What really counts are the values and rules of conduct that you use to judge behavior. The same act can be selfish to the wife while selfless to the manager, stupid to the brother while heroic to the pastor. Looking back, one is afforded the luxury of knowing the consequences of an act. And outcomes are the only sure form of judgment. Self-esteem. The pastor was right. 30 years later, that little girl received an award for a major contribution to her medical specialty. The pathological critic uses your beliefs and values to attack you. The shoulds that make up your rules for living form the ideological basis of the critic's effort to destroy your self-esteem. The critic is constantly evaluating what you say, what you do, and even what you feel by comparing you to an ideal of perfection. Since you live up to the ideal of how you ought to speak, act, or feel, the critic has endless grounds for indicting you as bad or worthless. Consider the case of the young man who gets 3 A's and AC+ on his report card. His beliefs about grades and success will entirely determine his reaction. If he uses the criteria of AB average as his standard for reasonable performance, then he'll be delighted to see that he has far exceeded his goal. If he believes that AC is a totally unacceptable grade, a sign of stupidity or laziness, then his critic will have all the punch it needs to make his self-esteem feel like it went 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali. How values are formed. Woodrow Wilson brought America into the First World War in order to make the world safe for democracy. US soldiers took their places in the trenches and foxholes of Europe believing that they were fighting against the forces of tyranny. Thousands died in the Argonne Forest and at St. Mihiel. The belief in nationalism, in the superiority of the American political system, and in such abstract values as duty and honor produced in 1917 a zealousness for the righteous war, a war that would forever end war. On the other side, young men were also dying for deeply held beliefs in German nationalism, in ideals of bravery and duty to the fatherland. Looking backward 7 decades, none of it seems worth fight. 4. Why should young Germans die because of the Kaiser's political ambitions? Why should American lives have been lost so that the Allies could use the Treaty of Versailles to punish and humiliate Germany and in so doing plant the seeds for World War II? Yet there is nothing new in this. Throughout history men have been dying for their beliefs, and rarely has the cause proved worthy of such sacrifice. Why are beliefs and values so powerful? What is it about the nature of belief that makes a man willing to surrender comfort, safety, even his life so that he will not be guilty of doing wrong? The answer is that while the content of a belief may be arbitrary and is 108. The shoulds. Often erroneous, the motivation for believing springs from the deepest human drives. Most beliefs are formed in the same way, in response to some basic need. Your first beliefs were generated out of the need to be loved and approved of by your parents. In order to feel safe and cared for, you adopted their beliefs about such things as how to work, how to handle anger, mistakes, and pain, how and when to be sexual, what one can and cannot talk about, what are the proper goals in life, how to act in a marriage, what is owed to parents and other family members, and how self-reliant one should be. Some of the rules and beliefs you acquired from your parents were promoted by value in words such as commitment, honesty, generosity, dignity, intelligence, or strength. Those terms, as well as their negative opposites, were used by your parents as value yardsticks to measure people and behavior. They applied some of them to you. And in your need to please your parents, you may have accepted even such negative labels as selfish, stupid, weak, or lazy. A second group of beliefs is generated by the need to feel belonging and approval from peers. To instance, you learn to live by rules and beliefs governing such areas as how to act with the opposite sex, how to handle aggression, how much to reveal, what you owe your community and the world at large, and what are appropriate sex role behaviors. The approval of peers often depends on your willingness to accept the group's beliefs. If you're American intervention in Latin America, for example, there is a strong pressure to either support that belief or face ostracism. A number of studies have shown that beliefs change dramatically in response to changes in role or status. For example, pro-union employees who are for workers' rights undergo a change in viewpoint when promoted to managerial positions. Within 6 months, they have often shifted significantly toward pro-management beliefs and values. Again, the need for belonging and safety literally creates new patterns of belief in order to fit in with the new reference group. There is a third major force that helps to shape your beliefs. This is the need for emotional and physical well-being. Included here is the need for self-esteem, the need to protect yourself from painful emotions such as hurt or loss, the need for pleasure, excitement, and meaning, and the need to feel physically safe. Consider the example of the aspiring city councilman. He explains to his wife that during the next year of campaigning he will have little time for her and the family. But it's a necessary sacrifice, he argues, because once elected, he will do so much for the community. The truth is that the few 109 self-esteem trivia changes a councilman could make might not be worth giving up a year with his children. But the truth is irrelevant. His belief is forged from a need for meaning, pleasure, and excitement. Now consider the case of a man recently fired from his job as a bookkeeper. He reports to a friend that he was crazy to ever take a job like that it was boring, soul-destroying, and politically incorrect. I've never met an accountant type, he says, who wasn't an unmitigated nerd. He vows not to sell out again, and some months later berates his sister for working in some downtown numbers factory. These opinions are an obvious rationalization. They are created entirely by the need to maintain self-esteem. This man must either devalue his employers or see himself as a failure. A woman tells her that he needs 3 nights a week to be alone or visit friends. She says to herself, you can't let a man take you for granted, and tells him that maybe they should call off their relationship. Her sudden conviction that she must assert herself is really in response to her need to avoid hurt and loss. A man is in danger of losing his leg due to complications of diabetes. He concludes that God is punishing him for a long-standing extramarital relationship. He forms the belief that breaking off the affair will save his leg. His need for physical safety and a sense of control is generating what he would call in better times, stupid, magical thinking. As a last case, consider a woman who believes in full commitment to every task and hates the smallest sign of laziness. She works long hours trying to meet impossible deadlines. But her hard work rule is really protecting her rather fragile self-esteem. Her need to see herself as competent and to feel safe from criticism is the fuel for her belief. The tyranny of the shoulds. Since most beliefs and rules are formed in response to needs, they have nothing to do with truth or reality. Generated by parental, cultural, and peer expectations and by your needs to feel loved, to belong, and to feel safe and good about yourself. While the process that generates shoulds has nothing to do with the literal truth, it depends on the idea of truth for its power. In order to feel motivated to act on a should, you have to be convinced of its veracity. For example, the case of Mrs. L. She is an ardent supporter of a Christian group that promotes the idea of chastity before marriage. Mrs. L. has 3 very strong needs that help to generate 110. The shoulds. Her belief about premarital sexuality. The first need is to win the love and acceptance of her mother, who is very uncomfortable with sexuality of any kind. Second need is to protect her children from environments and associations which she considers dangerous. A strict conscience is a good way to keep them safe. A third need is to feel a close identification with her children. She knows that they will seem strange and foreign to her if their sexual behavior differs markedly from her own. These 3 needs create the belief for Mrs. L, but her conviction that the belief is absolutely right in God's eyes gives it its power. She can insist on her values because they are true, and not only true for her children, but for everyone, everywhere in the world. This is the tyranny of shoulds, the absolute nature of belief, the unbending sense of right and wrong. If you don't live up to your shoulds, you judge yourself to be a bad and unworthy person. This is why people torture themselves with guilt and self-blame. This is why they are willing to die in wars. This is why they become paralyzed when forced to choose between unbending rules and genuine desire. Here is a list of some of the most common pathological shoulds. I should be the epitome of generosity and unselfishness. I should be the perfect lover, friend, parent, teacher, student, spouse, and so on. E should be able to endure any hardship with equanimity. I should be able to find a quick solution to every problem. E should never feel hurt. I should always feel happy and serene. E should be completely competent. E should know, understand, and foresee everything. E should never feel certain emotions such as anger or jealousy. E should love my children equally. E should never make mistakes. My emotions should be constant. Once I feel love, I should always feel love. Should be totally self-reliant. Should never be tired or get sick. Should never be afraid. Should have achievements that bring me status, wealth, or power. 111. Self-esteem. Should always be busy. To relax is to waste my time in my life. I should put others first. It is better that I feel pain than cause anyone else to feel pain. Scent should be unfailingly kind. Should never feel sexually attracted to should care for everyone who cares for me. Should make enough money so my family can afford. I should be able to protect my children from all pain. Should not take time just for my own pleasure. Notice which of these shoulds apply to you. In the section on healthy versus unhealthy values, you can explore why these shoulds are unreasonable. Healthy versus unhealthy values. You can tell whether your beliefs, rules, and shoulds are healthy or unhealthy by applying the following criteria. Healthy values are full. Flexible rules allow for exceptions where circumstances warrant, while unhealthy rules are unbending and universally applied. For example, the rule that you should avoid causing other people pain could be workable if exceptions were made in cases where your own vital needs were at stake. But if the rule is unbending and you are obliged to protect others from pain at any personal cost, then you have an unhealthy value. Unhealthy values are rigid. They often include words like never, always, all, totally, perfectly, and so on. You must either follow the rule or feel worthless and bad. A second way to measure the flexibility of your rules is to look at your failure quotas. Flexible rules include a built-in awareness that a certain percentage of the time you will fail to live up to the ideal standard. Rigid rules have no such quota system. You are crucified if you deviate 1 millimeter from the straight and narrow. As an example, consider the rule, I should never make mistakes. Striving for excellence is a worthy ambition, but you need a healthy quota for mistakes and failures. Without such a quota your stress level will be high, and your self-esteem will be destroyed by the smallest error. 112. The shoulds. Healthy values are owned rather than interjected. Owning a belief or should means that you've critically examined this rule for living and it still makes sense to you. This is in contrast to interjected rules, where you accept parental values without determining how well they fit your own unique circumstances, personality, and needs. Unquestioning acceptance of parental rules and values is like buying a car without a test drive. You just accept everything the salesman says, and never find out how the car handles, whether the ceiling's too low for your height, if it has enough power, or if the transmission works smoothly. With interjected values you accept your parents' word for things that you should test and evaluate yourself. Healthy values are realistic. This means that they are based on an assessment of positive versus negative consequences. A realistic value or rule promotes behavior that leads to positive outcomes. It encourages you to do things that result in long-term happiness for the people involved. That's the purpose of a value. You follow it because in your experience the value guides you toward a way of living that feels good. Unrealistic values and shoulds have nothing to do with outcomes. They are absolute and global. They describe behavior because it is right and good, not because it leads to positive consequences. Unrealistic values require you to act, on principle, no matter how much pain the act brings to yourself and others. Consider the value. Marriage should last forever. As a rule governing your behavior, it's unrealistic. That's because it isn't based on outcomes. It doesn't take into account the fact that struggling to maintain your marital commitments may make you and your spouse unhappier than divorcing. The marriage should last forever rule is based on the unbending principle that marital commitment is the highest good. Your happiness is irrelevant. Your pain is irrelevant. All that counts is doing the right thing. Now consider the rule, I should be honest with my spouse. This value could be either realistic or unrealistic, depending on how you frame it. The rule will be realistic if you believe that it promotes intimacy, helps to solve problems before they get too large, and encourages you to voice your needs. In other words, you can adhere to the value of marital honesty because you know it usually makes you feel good in the long run. But because your value of honesty is based on outcomes, you might not always choose to be honest. At certain times you might withhold your feelings because the prospect of greater intimacy would be outweighed by negative consequences of hurt or discord. In contrast, your honesty in marriage value would be unrealistic if it were based on principle rather than 113. Self-esteem. Outcomes or consequences. Force yourself to adhere to the rule because it was right and dishonesty of any kind was wrong. In the study of ethics, this approach is called consequentialism. What makes consequentialism appealing is that ethical systems based on absolute principles inevitably reach a point where some of the principles contradict each other. This problem can be demonstrated on a very simple level. Consider the conflict a child must face when trying to decide whether the highest good is telling his parents the truth or keeping a confidence with his brother. He will have to break one of his principles by either lying or betraying a sibling. The only realistic way you can escape such an ethical quandary is to evaluate the negative and positive consequences of each choice for all parties concerned. Healthy values are life-enhancing rather than life-restricting. This means that the rules you live by must take into account your basic needs as a human being. Healthy values give you the flexibility to pursue your emotional, sexual, intellectual, and recreational needs. Your rules for living should not diminish or narrow you. They shouldn't leave you feeling depleted by self-sacrifice. Enhancing values encourage you to do what is nourishing and supportive, except in situations where the long-term consequences are painful for yourself or others. As an example, take the rule that you should always put your children first. This is not a life-enhancing value. There are many times when your needs are in conflict with needs of your children. Staying healthy and balanced requires that you sometimes take care of yourself, even though your children will suffer a minor deprivation. Men who believe that they should never feel afraid are stuck with a life-restricting value. This belief denies the reality that a man can feel fear in many circumstances and has a right to acknowledge and accept that feeling. The same difficulty occurs when you have rules demanding that you be universally bright and cheery. The value is life-enhancing, because it denies you the right to feel a full range of emotion, including times when you're sad, frustrated, or angry. Exercise. In exercise, you will read vignettes about real-life situations and the values that people use to guide them. In each case, the protagonist of the story uses a rule which violates one or more of the criteria for healthy values. See if you can spot which criteria is being violated. To refresh your memory, here again are the criteria for healthy versus unhealthy values. 114. The shoulds. Healthy values, unhealthy values. 1. Flexible, exceptions rigid, global, no exceptions and quotas or quotas. 2. Owned, examined, introjected, unquestioned. And tested, acceptance. 3. Realistic, based on unrealistic, based on consequences, rightness. 4. Balancing, life restricting, acknowledge your needs and feelings. Situation 1. Ellen is a 30-year-old craftsperson. She loves working with her hands and specializes in making customized lampshades. Last year she opened a small shop and is very much enjoying her first experience as an entrepreneur. Ellen's father is a full-time professor. He's always been disappointed that she didn't study harder and express a greater interest in academics. Despite the pleasure that she gets from her craft, Ellen has a nagging sense of failure. She feels that she should be teaching English, like she planned and her father wanted. She feels embarrassed that she isn't using her brain. She had tried to go back to college 3 different times, and on each occasion dropped out. She confides to friends that in some ways her life has been a waste. What's wrong with Ellen's values? Which of the following apply? Rigid introjected, unrealistic, life restricting. Ellen's problem is that she has introjected her father's value system without examining how it fits her unique needs and abilities. For years, Ellen has been tortured by values and rules that she never critically examined. If Ellen had developed her own realistic values, she would have recognized the positive consequences of working at her craft. She has a job that she enjoys and does well, as opposed to struggling with the rigors of an academic career. Situation 2. Arthur has been an insurance broker for the past 8 years. He has been moderately successful but has never made the big money. Arthur's biggest problem is that he feels like a failure every time he loses an account. While losing accounts is inevitable, and every broker anticipates a certain attrition rate for old accounts, Arthur feels that a good broker must please every one of 115. Self-esteem. His clients. When a client cancels, Arthur concludes that he is screwing up and hasn't been sufficiently attentive. What's wrong with Arthur's values? Which of the following apply? Rigid introjected, unrealistic, life restricting. Arthur's rules are too rigid. He expects to be perfect, and when he is not 100% effective in re-enlisting clients, he labels himself a failure. Flexible values allow a quota for being human. You expect to make mistakes, and so you build a realistic failure rate into your expectations. If Arthur's values were flexible, he would find out the renewal percentages for other brokers. Then he could build a quota for lost accounts into his performance standards. Situation 3. Every year Cynthia spends a week in Ann Arbor visiting her mother. She stays in her mother's home, where she feels continually attacked and undermined by criticism. After the first 24 hours of good behavior, the relationship quickly degenerates to the point where Cynthia and her mom are having several blow-ups a day. If Cynthia doesn't respond, her mother rebukes her for not listening. If she tries to defend herself, her mother simply shifts the ground and discusses another of Cynthia's failings. This year Cynthia has decided to handle the visit differently. She stays at a motel, even though her mother insists that she stay at home. She spends more time visiting friends and taking breaks from her mom. She also refuses to see her aunt, who often joins forces with her mother for a 2-on-1 fight. Despite the fact that there are far fewer fights and an unusually sweet goodbye, despite feeling safer and less beat up, Cynthia experiences guilt about her decision. I hated myself for doing it. I ought to be loving and sort of endure things for mom's sake. What's wrong with Cynthia's values? Which of the following apply? Rigid introjected, unrealistic, life restricting. Cynthia's values are unrealistic. They are based on the principle of doing right, rather than a realistic assessment of consequences. If Cynthia looked at the consequences, she would conclude that she felt safer and happier with her new strategy. She would realize that there was much less conflict and that for once she and her mother felt good about each other when they parted. Situation 4. Will, an upholsterer by day, a delivery man by night, and a security guard on the weekend. He feels he has to be 116. The shoulds. Busy every minute in order to achieve something in life. Will hates waiting time, because I'll keep feeling like I'm nothing till I earn some money and respect. Will is in a relationship that he doesn't like, but has no time to look for anyone new. He lives, on the cheap, in a hotel Roach Haven. What's wrong with Will's values? Which of the following apply? Rigid introjected, unrealistic, life restricting. Will's values are life-restricting. They don't take into account his basic needs for recreation, intimacy, or friendship. Will is leaving a lot of himself on the road to die in his headlong race for wealth and